See you later.
You think it'd be wrong if I took my mask off when I talk? If I can stay up here?
Say it
You
again,
think
man.
it'd be wrong if I took my mask off when I stay up here and talk and put it back on?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Go right ahead. Thank you. What's that? If you want to take your mask off like that.
I'm on social distance for the crowd up here. Are we ready? You think we're ready?
Yeah, I think we're ready.
There you go.
Okay, looks like everybody's finding their seat. I'm gonna stay social distance from you, but I'm gonna take my mask off so you can hear me and not listen to me mumble. First, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight to attending our town hall. We are here to get information about two options for renovating this building and creating a new city hall and library. A little background information. During the snow disaster of 2019, the roof of our city hall and library was damaged. We had to close the back of the building where the library was located. This building became available and was purchased in 2019. The city reached out to the community for input as to what they wanted in the new city hall and library. After months of meetings and review, the Lowell Community Facility Study was completed and approved by the council in 2020, last year. This year, the city went through an open bidding process before selecting an architectural design company to create design options and oversee the construction. Kurt Wilson's architect was selected. Kurt's company has worked with many small towns and the only company with a library specialist to help in the library design. Kurt submitted numerous plans and options for review to a committee made up of library volunteers and the council. These two final plans were selected for your review. Now some housekeeping. Of course, we know where the bathrooms are. The purpose of the town hall is to provide residents important information, allow the residents to ask questions, and for everyone to better understand what is being planned. I would like to encourage you to listen to what is presented, ask questions that will help you better understand. When it's your turn to speak, share your questions and thoughts in a constructive manner. Leaving something unsaid or unasked doesn't help anyone. We cannot know or understand what someone else thinks unless we listen to them. All perspectives are valid. When someone asks a question that challenges your thinking, listen to better understand why they think like they do. This town hall style meeting is not designed to support an argument. It is designed to learn together and create a shared understanding of this topic. Everyone is deserving of respect. That means we all need to treat each other with kindness and respect. It also means that we all need to avoid distractions. Please don't do anything that would prevent others from hearing whoever is speaking. Please silence or turn off your technology and focus your attention on the topic at hand. With that, it is my pleasure to present Kurt Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it, and I'll do the same thing. I'll take my mask off here so you can hear me a little bit better. So I'm Kurt Wilson with Wilson Architecture. I'm here talking about the project, but I'm really here to represent the library committee, and that's the board at the end is the name of the library committee. And many of the members of the committee are here, and I'd encourage you if you would raise your hand if you're on the committee, if you would raise your hand just so we know who's participating. And if you have questions at the end, you're more than welcome. I encourage you to talk to all of us about the project. So what I'm going to do relatively briefly is get to how we got to these two design options and what the differences are, how they benefit the city in different ways and the community in different ways. And as the mayor mentioned, in 2018 through 2020, some community planning happened through a consultant. There was really two planning efforts. There was the City of Lowell Downtown Master Plan that really looked at future opportunities around downtown. And then in addition to that was the public facility study that looked specifically at this site and how to best utilize this building and deal with the challenges that created with the storm and the damage to the roof at the City Hall building. Talk a little bit about that building here in a second. But what came out of that was, and this is the site plan, north, which is this way, is on this end. South, which is this way, in reality is actually to the right here. But the idea was to renovate this building to locate the library in this building, which is what you see here. And then at the south end of the site was to build a new city hall. And the idea was that the library would be, in the short term, would serve to support City Hall until the new City Hall building got constructed. And so that's what came out of that planning that was done in 2020, and then some funding, and Jeremy will talk a little bit more about funding, came out of that availability to kind of get started with the project to renovate this building. And that's where we are now. And through the process, the design team that I'm leading, but it includes design consultants for mechanical, electrical, structural, civil, and a cost estimator, and a library planning consultant, have been looking at how to best utilize this building to meet the city's goals. So the way we do that is we start by just, when you're doing a renovation, and by the way, my favorite types of projects are renovating existing buildings, particularly for community use. There's really nothing better for an architect to be able to do to get the most out of an existing building. So we really just kind of combed through this building, got everywhere we could. We got in the attic, we popped the ceiling. By the way, this ceiling was installed about '89 when some renovation work was done, and the existing ceiling is right above it. And we're really just trying to understand what's here that's of good value we want to keep, what's here that really needs to be replaced, and where are opportunities. And so there are some nice opportunities with this building. It's a nice, relatively small building. It's in good shape. There's the siding well in pretty good shape. It's got some generous overhangs, a complete walkway about 7 feet wide along the south side, and then the carport's pretty deep with a roof structure. So there's some opportunities here outside of the building proper that's covered by a roof that we want to take advantage of. The systems of the building, the lights were installed in '89. This building originally was the part that we're in right now. And then at some point, we don't know when, this area was built onto it. And then the carport area and some of this renovation was done in about '89. And so we have a pretty good idea of the building itself. The other thing is where it sits on the side, it's got a nice presence to Pioneer and First. It's also got on the east side a fairly generous amount of area to expand the building or to be able to grow into or use in different ways where that outdoor shed is. There are some areas that need to be addressed. This building doesn't meet accessibility requirements as we know them now. There's some accessible parking out there, but there's not really an accessible route to get into the building. So that needs to be addressed, relatively minor thing. The restrooms are not accessible per the code definition. There isn't the spaces required around fixtures. We'll talk about that in some of the design options. But there's no windows, as you can see. Some drawings indicate there were some windows on this wall and that wall. They got filled in '89, but some of us have been in here for a few hours, and you kind of lose track of where you are, what time of day it is, what the weather is, that kind of thing. So for a building that's going to be occupied, the issue of no windows is something we need to address. Relatively minimal roof insulation. That's not uncommon in a building of this age, and that can be easily remedied. There are 2 mechanical units on the east end of the building. They're of different ages, and one is at pretty much near the end of its useful life. Will need to be replaced soon. The other thing, that second unit was added when this building was renovated in 1989. And what was done was the mechanical ducting connecting all of these grills that were installed were basically just augmenting the mechanical unit that was in place, but it was intended for this large open area. Well, when you start to, and there's no conventional zoning of the mechanical system of this building. Typically, when you have multiple mechanical units, you run the duct so that the units are serving different parts of the building. And that's not what we have here. So as we look at putting walls in and starting to segregate the building, we have to deal with the ductwork because we want to run the units so they serve zones appropriately. So we're going to have to deal with mechanical, the ducting that's overhead here. But by and large, that's pretty, these things are not big, overall, in and of themselves, individual items are not that big of a deal. But there are some things that we just need to address moving forward. And so, as we mentioned, the intention of the project is to accommodate the City Hall and the library space. And the initial thought with this building was primarily going to accommodate the library, and it will at least get it something, enough space for City Hall to move out of that existing building. And so just a recap of the building, and Jeremy will point it out on a map when we get down to the end of into the boards. City Hall is a few thousand square feet. There's about 1,200 square feet for city admin. That's where you come in, the reception area where staff work, including the city administrator's office. The meeting area is about 450 square feet. In the middle is the library. Again, it doesn't have any windows. It's central into the building. And you see some photos here, which I'll point out to you. The library is about 700 square feet. And then there's a lot of storage in the building, about 1,300, about 1,600 when you add that area on. So that building is bigger than this building. And and the area where there's a lot of space is storage. And so that's something we're going to have to look at. And it's got some nice, where staff works, it's got some nice windows and views to the park. It's got spaces, and I'm assuming most of you are familiar with City Hall. And if you want, please, when you get down here, take a look at some photos. The library itself is primarily a space where books are stored. Now, that's obviously a key component to a library, but it's not everything a library is. But it is essentially, that 700 square feet is full of books. And so we want to be able to acknowledge that, and as we move forward, we want to look at some other opportunities for libraries. Our library planning consultant, based on working with the library committee and her experience, Penny is a library planning consultant, but most of her professional life has been as a librarian operating various sized libraries. So she brings a lot of experience operating a library, and with that has helped us identify some working square footages that we should be targeting. We're looking at, if we were to start a new library space, we would be targeting about 2,500 square feet, which is a little smaller than what this building is now, by about 300 square feet. And so, and that's separated between public areas, lobbies, things like that. The adult services, primary space, most of the books are, and most activities in the library, but also some space for different youth areas. A children's area in the library, possibly a teen area, and then space for staff, and then some additional support. So this is, hopefully, if you can't see this, I'd encourage you to come take a look at it, look how that organizes itself. But looking at a library, we really want to think about what, as you're planning a building, it's always important to think long-term, in terms of what does that building need to be over, decades, because that's when you build something, it's got to last for you. And so making sure that the library is open, is a pleasant place to be, windows and daylight is an important part of it. Having, as this photo shows, having space for group activities. So children's room with children activities, which is different than what's in the library now. Those kind of spaces don't really exist within the library. So having group activities, also having places for people, children or adults, to be able to read and to be able to access the book. It's one thing to be able to get to a book, it's another thing to be able to do something with it, to be able to find it. And so having a library that really supports the way that we use libraries, and I've been kind of focusing on the book side of that, but also there's a lot that goes into libraries that is beyond books, but it's also access to information. For some people, it's a place to be able to access Wi-Fi and computer stations and things like that. So those are all important considerations as we think about how we're thinking about the library itself. So, what you've received in the mail, what you see here are design options A and B. These are, as the mayor referenced them, the finalists of what started off as about 5 different design scenarios. And they really kind of represent the ends of the options that were considered. Option A renovates the building as it is now. Option B expands and reorganizes the building, but it expands under existing roofs. So in option B, we're not building any new roof area. We're just working within the roof, and we're getting an increase of about 900 square feet by doing that, by expanding under the carport area and under that walkway area here. So in option A, we are, again, I'm standing right about here. I'm just going to kind of work our way as you come into the building. So a subtle change to the entrance. We want to expand the entrance, make it a little bit more open. And we're moving it and doing that. We're just moving it over about 6 feet. And the way we're dealing with accessibility in the restrooms is we're actually just removing plumbing fixtures. There's more toilets, sinks. There's more toilets and sinks in the building now than we need for the building code. And so to provide the space, we're taking fixtures out. That's relatively economical. What you end up with is an inefficient bathroom because based on the number of fixtures we have a lot more space than we actually need. But that's what allows us to not get into the slab and just, deal with our accessibility in that way. And then across where that opening is now under the exit sign, we would then have a little bit more wall, fill that in, but have an area for a public counter and a door. And then the purple area is the city hall space. I should have highlighted that. Purple is the city hall space. The yellow is common areas, and then the green, and that's not as green as that, but trust me, that's supposed to be green, is the library itself. And so in the city hall space, we're basically utilizing that office. In this particular option, it made more sense to kind of reorganize this area so we have a conference room right there, and then the space right in there gets reorganized for the work area for staff. And then there's a wall that's across here, which is right about there, and that would then separate the library. So the rest of this space would be the library. We would keep that door. We would remove that raised platform for accessibility reasons and functional reasons. We would also take out those storage rooms because they're built on that platform and they don't provide us a lot of value. And we would then utilize that corner for the kids area. There would be a door aligned with that door on that north wall, and then the plan is to have an outdoor space, courtyard space for the library on that end. So we are, in this option, relatively modest improvements in terms of walls. We would keep the ceiling. We would modify, we would replace some of the lights as needed for the walls, but we're actually going to try and keep as much of the lights as possible. We're going to reorganize that ductwork based on our new wall that goes in and segregate, as the space gets subdivided, and then of course renovating the restroom. New flooring, and because it's going to get damaged during construction, paint the walls, take off these pilasters. But basically, add some windows on both walls, but basically keep the roof, keep the siding, not touch outside at all. And that's why it's a more economical solution. It is estimated for project costs, which includes construction fees, designer fees, all the things related to doing construction, is estimated at just a little under $400,000, which would translate, and Jeremy will talk a little bit more about the details, to a utility fee of about $256 a month. And so that's a relatively that amount compared to what you're going to see here. One reason why we're just trying to, it's a minimal improvement to get into the building and to provide space. Now, unfortunately, this option gives us about 1,300, let me just double check my notes here, about 1,400 square feet for the library compared to the 2,500 we're targeting. City Hall is pretty small, and it does not, this is a conference room. What we're lacking in this option is a room big enough to be a council, for council meetings. And so, we're not sure where that would happen in this scenario, the idea of moving out of City Hall. It's a pretty minimal option, but it utilizes the building with the least amount of improvement. And then, so, option, and it also just, not really thinking about what happens with City Hall as city services might need to expand. Okay, city is, there's, permits for new buildings going on, there's, it's a desirable location. I live in west of Eugene, I love it here. My wife, I was telling somebody, my wife is, when she looks at the real estate section, tends to now focus on malls. So I think it's, we're not the only ones, this community is gonna grow. Will city services grow? Possibly. So, what happens with City Hall as we move out here? So that conversation actually motivated us to look at the building a little bit differently. What if we just said that, what happens under the roof? Doesn't matter where walls are now, doesn't matter where plumbing fixtures are now. Let's just look at what happens if we just work with them under the roof. And that's what option B is. Option B is basically taking over the west end of the building, including the area that's now the carport, and converts it to the library. And then takes the center of the building, where I am now, and under this walkway, creates a fairly generous lobby that provides good circulation to the library, the City Hall, and then the meeting room. A meeting room that is sufficient for council meetings, for community meetings, could function and support community center type activities when the library has an activity, that meeting room or multi-purpose room is very flexible and be able to support that. So it's positioned central for the activities. It's also positioned so that there is access to the lobby, access to restrooms. This could be used for an event like this at night. You could walk off the library closed, and walk off City Hall. And so it gives the city some flexibility in terms of uses of these spaces, and not have to have too much staffing or supervision. And then on the east end, reorganizes the space to get the City Hall services on the east end of the building. And one of the things that this does is it gives the opportunity, if the building were going to grow in the future, it's probably city services that would grow in City Hall. And so it puts the City Hall in the area that would grow, that's easiest to accommodate future growth. But it doesn't have to happen. The idea of the size of this building, the 37, almost 3,800 square foot building, should be enough to accommodate the City Hall needs in the short term. And so that's the intention of this option. The library is about 1,900 square feet. So it's 500 square feet larger than this. It's still under our target. But at this point, we're not going to, the strategy of trying to build within the roof area, we're not going to get that library of that size. And I think that's going to be okay. I mean, I think there's a lot of value that's going to, with a 1,900 square foot library. Some of the other things that are folded into the budget for this. So the budget, the project cost budget for this, this option is listed as 1.8 million, and that's what you're on, sort of more specifically is 1.854 million. So it's a little higher than 1.8 million. And it has a monthly utility fee per month of $12.06. So that you can see what that scale is. In general, I'll put that a little bit more into context. Now, keep in mind, not only is that budget related to the improvements that I mentioned, so we've got more demolition in this building, we're going to have more interior square footage, so we've got more paint, carpet, and those kind of things. But we are, we're planning on this, in this option, to replace the mechanical system. So not only are we going to revise the ductwork, but we're also going to upgrade the units more appropriate for the size of the building. We are looking at, the budget includes replacing all of the roofs. So let me explain what we're looking at here. The roof's in pretty good shape. If you stand in the parking lot and look this way, it looks good. If you stand on Pioneer and look on that west facing side, you'll actually see those shingles are starting to curl. And that's, that's just aging shingles. Eventually, all roof needs to be replaced. So, at some point, the city, relatively soon, probably within 10 years, the city should plan on replacing the roof. Well, we are, as we do the infilling under the roofs, particularly this covered walkway out here, we're going to need to do some structural connections from the roof to the wall. So we're going to need to take some amount of roof off to do that work and replace it. So the budget includes really trying to anticipate deferred maintenance expenses that are going to come up relatively soon. We've got budgeted to replace all of the roof. We do have budget to address all of the siding. Now, whether we need to do that or not is an open question, but we're going to put windows in the building all throughout the place, so we're going to have some repairs on the siding. The siding on the Pioneer on the south side look pretty good. They're in pretty good shape, quite frankly. Siding on this side, I'm a little bit more concerned about. It's more of a T111, and it's probably going to need to be replaced a little bit sooner. So we've got budget in this number to address all of the siding on the building. And then we also have a budget to address pretty comprehensively all the pavement on the site. So if you've noticed when you came in here, that the pavement is pretty much referred to as alligator. It's just cracked all over the place. One of our civil engineer noticed that on a Google Maps, the pavement looks really good. And it wasn't that, the date of the image wasn't that, it might have been big maps, but it wasn't that old. And now it looks pretty bad. It's cracked up a lot. So this is an indication that the subbase of the pavement is probably pretty comprehensive, not only comprehensive fail, but it's not in good shape. So any kind of coating that would go on top, which you would normally do to seal pavement, is not going to last very long because the subbase isn't what we need, right? So we've got money in here to upgrade the pavement. So not only does this budget address the short term of getting in the building, but it also starts to allocate doing some work that might otherwise be deferred maintenance. And it just makes sense to do that as part of the construction project. Deferred maintenance is expensive. Been involved, they've been doing this architecture on public facilities for 30 years. It's just almost unreasonable to expect public agencies to be able to do real deferred maintenance on an ongoing basis through operating budgets. There's just not enough money to do that. And so most deferred maintenance is happening through capital improvement projects such as this. And most of us do this when we sell our house. We all have deferred maintenance in our own house. It's just that, we're going to sell the house, we need to fix it up so it looks attractive to a buyer. It's really the same thing, right? We're just not doing deferred maintenance at the level we need to, simply because it's just too expensive. And so I think, part of trying to think about the construction project, what are the deferred maintenance obligations that are coming up? And let's address those as part of this project. So that's part of what we're looking at doing here. So I think I covered everything in the design options. I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to go through that, and then we'll come back to questions. Okay?
Thank you, Kurt. All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jeremy Caldwell, City Administrator. Question is, we got this great idea on a new library, a new city hall. How do we pay for it? A few ideas on funding streams and proposals on how to accomplish that. The first is through grant revenues. We have an outstanding grant with the Ford Family Foundation. They fund projects that are exactly like this. They'll only fund the library portion of it, so the city will have to pay for the city hall portion. The maximum amount that they said we could get from them is $250,000 or a third of the project, whichever is less. So if we go with option A, that would be, and they let us add in the purchase price of the property. So that plus the construction cost would be about $191,000. And then if we go with option B, we're going to hit that $250,000 max. So grant funding is one avenue that we're looking at. The other avenue is liquidating city properties that the city doesn't need and to sell that for private development. A few of the properties identified on this board include the eastern corner of the current campus, which is vacant on that side over there. Vacant property on Highland that's already got a for sale sign up there. At Rolling Rock Park, the master plan for Rolling Rock Park contemplates that we're going to extend Cannon Street and consolidate the western part and then sell the eastern part for commercial development, because that ties into our downtown master plan. And then the last is, once we vacate City Hall, to sell that property for multifamily or other appropriate use. So based on some projections that we have on what we could potentially sell those properties for, once you net out the commissions, once you net out the survey work we're gonna have to do, all that good stuff, it's about $520,000. So for option B, that is about $750,000 that we could put towards that project. As far as the loan financing that we would have to acquire, there's a couple public agencies that are going to help us out to get us a low interest loan. For instance, if we took a 40-year 2.25% loan, which the U.S. Department of Agriculture could give us, and we use the property sales and the grant monies, that takes that 40-year loan and turns it into a 20-year loan. If we go by the grants and the property sales, we can pay off the loan for option A early and then have some money left over. And then finally, whenever we're looking at it, if we go with option B, a 20-year loan, that's about $70,000 that we need to fill in our general fund. The proposal is a utility fee to cover the cost of operations for the library in that amount so that we would have additional resources. As we're waiting for these properties to sell, and we have a loan for option A, if that's what we go with, we're going to have to find a way to pay for that. So what that amounts to is about a $2.50 per month fee. That is pretty much a summary of the plan for how to finance this project with whichever option that we choose. Before I turn it back over to Mayor Bennett to wrap up and open it up for questions, we have, or Kurt, we have some surveys on the table there. I'll ask as you're leaving. The survey is going to ask you, what do you think we should do before? What do you think we should do after? Explain any changes. Fold it up, put it in the basket. We're going to use that information along with the mail-in surveys to inform the final decision on this. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kurt, to wrap it up.
One more thing I forgot to mention here before we jump into questions. I didn't compare the restrooms, and I wanted to do that. So again, I said the restrooms here, the strategy is to remove fixtures to make it accessible. The option here are, we need 3 toilets based on the plumbing count by the code. So the strategy that we're using here is 3 individual occupant restrooms that are in the center of the building. Now, we moved the restrooms, and isn't plumbing very expensive in a building? Yes, so let me tell you how that actually came about. We were trying to understand where the waistline is that's serving these toilets. Max was able to, with his public works crews, was able to get a camera in outside the building with a clean out to our waistline, and they were able to run a camera in, and they determined that the waistline comes about like this, comes through and comes over here, and couldn't find it after about this location. This last 20, 30 feet was pretty deteriorating, probably isn't going to last very long. remember I said that this is the original building, and when we had one of our first meetings, when I mentioned that, Sam said, well, where are the bathrooms? Well, we're assuming that there were probably restrooms here. When this was done, when this was built, given what we've been able to find, my speculation is that they probably came out here, ran here and tied into the waistline. Well, so we've got waistline is near the end of his life, and so at some point that's got to get replaced. And so we're not addressing that in this option. What we were talking about in one of our meetings as a group was in First, right about up here, there's actually a waistline in the street that's pretty low. And so putting the restrooms here and running the new waistline out to it is actually pretty economical, given what we know. And so that's why we saw putting the restrooms in this part of the building was, again, part of that, anticipating deferred maintenance costs. We're not tying into a system that we don't trust, we're just putting in a new system now for longevity of the building. So anyway, I wanted to I forgot to mention that. And you had a question, so why don't we go ahead and take the question?
All right, I'll start then with my question. In option B, you didn't mention sprinklering, but I understand that comes into play with option B.
Yeah, so thank you. The existing building is not sprinklered. The building code does not require it to be sprinklered at the size of it. It's a wood building, but because it's a relatively small building, it's not needing to be sprinklered. But we have included in this budget the cost to add sprinklers. Quite frankly, sprinklers aren't that expensive, especially when you're doing it with other construction work. And there's really two reasons for adding that into the project, in addition to the fact that they're not that expensive, all things considered. If this building is added onto, eventually it would need fire sprinklers. And so having something to build from would be needed at that point. It also just simply provides protection. We live in a part of the country that's burning more, and just having fire sprinklers makes some sense. Now, I understand, fire sprinklers are designed to protect buildings from fires that happen within, but they're good protection. They also provide good insurance rate differences. So that's why we added the fire sprinkler into that budget.
Can I clarify that? I thought you said option A didn't require sprinkling, and that might.
Neither
you were saying
the size of
option
the
B,
building.
neither one requires sprinkling.
The code isn't going to force us to add fire sprinklers right
thank you.
now. That's what I meant to say. But yes, sir.
We saw on the recent bridge that this building had been vandalized recently. Could you talk about the current security systems, the option A security systems, and the option B security systems, which are substantially more expensive?
Yeah,
Please.
so, right, thank you. So we included, right now, the building is just not utilized. It's dark. With so much, you can't really see these doors well from the street. And Jeremy or Max can speak more about what happened recently. But the intention, quite frankly, having a building that's occupied is going to be helpful to minimize those kinds of things happening. We don't have much in this budget. We don't have much for security. We would plan on putting in, the kind of Ring Wi-Fi type cameras could go in, and really those can go in relatively economically. And there's not much more in the budget for security than that in this budget. In this budget, we have a more robust security budget that includes hardwired security cameras that are high resolution, and it's with a security internal or a site-located security system that has its own computer and hard drive. So that security footage can be downloaded and archived and saved. If you have a Ring system at home, you're probably familiar that, or something like that. Those you can get the cameras relatively inexpensively, and then you can get a connection. With a connection that you might have, you can then stream that footage and see something happening at a moment, or when someone comes to your door, you might get alerted to it. But the cost, on those kind of cloud-based systems to actually pay for storage is where it starts to get expensive, and that's where they make their money. So, but the intention of having that, a system that's with a computer on site, that's stored, where that information is stored and can be easily retrieved is the intention. We also would then have motion sensors and those kinds of things inside of it. And a fire alarm system. Yes, sir.
So that you would have alarms on each entryway then that would create a sound, rather than just relying on cameras.
They secure the sound, yes, it would go, it could be a monitor, the intention is a monitored security system. That would go.
Because, you know, it needs to go off before they get into the building, not wait till they've got in and then look for a picture of them.
Right, right. I mean, the security cameras are deterrent. If someone knows they're being viewed, that's the deterrent aspect of it. And so being able to know when something is actually happening because of those sounds, that's the intention. Or when phone calls are happening, things like that. To alert you of that. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say, appreciate all the effort that you put into this and the plan, but I'm wondering if anybody thought about something different than this, as to leave this library as a library. One of the things, you're talking about all the forced air heating and all that kind of thing. Ductless heating, I've used them, probably could do enough to keep this building heated and cooled for $20,000. And you got a lot of parking lot out here, and Palm Harbor will build you something for 1,800 square feet for maybe $180,000. And what I'm saying is, I think you could make this library a library, and you could do the city hall in another building for a hell of a lot less. You're looking at $900,000 for 900 square feet. Is that how it kind of comes out? You're looking at 400,000.
Like I was saying,
And
we've done
$1.8 million or
that-
$1.4 million for the next one.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, that the budget that's reflected here also includes
Well,
replacing the pavement, replacing roofs, so it's doing more than just simply addressing the.
well, I really understand it, but we really don't have the money to spend this much money. Have you looked at other alternatives?
We have discussed other ideas as well, yes. I would not.
Have you looked at a double wide or even a triple wide put out here that you could design as a huge city hall? You know, where you could have all kind of meeting rooms for an awful lot less money. Just a thought. As far as the infrastructure to do it, the city has the equipment to dig the ground up and put the infrastructure in to plumb a city hall right out here. You still got plenty of parking lot for all the necessary things you need. Just a thought.
Bill, you have your hand up?
Well, I guess I would just toss out the thought, because that is something we have, we did have that idea at one point, but the question to the city would be, is that what we want to put out there in terms of the looks of our downtown? Because if we do a double wide or a modular type thing, we'd probably be looking at it for a number of years. I'm not saying it's not a good idea, I'm just asking that question because I think that's very important to people in terms of what our downtown plan is. So just a thought.
So just a quick question, what is the size of the meeting room in option B?
Let me see, I don't have that off the top of my head, I want to see if I have that. I don't have a good answer for you, so I won't make it up.
Yeah, so I
When we
asked
get
that
down on
because,
the Robert scale, I'm just thinking.
I asked that, my concern is, the city has had, you know, a quite small meeting room forever. I would hope that any new plan has a meeting room that's large enough so the council can sit facing its constituents easily. Yeah, I think that's a very critical thing. To be honestly, it's kind of, I'm hard of hearing, and when they sit, as you guys do now, and have for a number of years, and you're and some of the other committees, and are talking to each other across the table, we can't hear you. You know, and we can't see your eyes, we can't see your facial expressions, we can't understand. So I think a large enough conference room is absolutely critical. And Bill's idea, I think that's well worth exploring. And that would be a way that would also facilitate making that happen.
I'm writing that down just so I'm struggling. I would agree, you know, the strategy here is to take a look at what we can do within the roof areas. Where the boundaries of those spaces are, something we would continue to evaluate as we move forward here in terms of, you know, not only the right size of that meeting room, but the right proportions of those spaces to be able to accommodate that. Yes, ma'am.
I might have missed this, but do both of those plans or either of them take into account a cost for demolition of the current city hall?
No.
Is there additional cost that the, whatever you want to call it, the folks in the city, like, would that be tacked onto our water bill or what have you at some point in the future?
Sure, I can answer that. Whatever we're talking about, the selling the current City Hall site,
Mhm.
the number that I gave, about 520,000, that nets out the demolition costs that we're estimating for that building.
Okay, so that would be taken care of and considered in the selling price of
That's
that
correct.
property?
That's correct.
You, go ahead, then we'll go to you.
Okay, so with Plan A, that seems very short-sighted, not big enough any way you look at it for future growth or current. And then Plan B, what is the, what do I would want to call it? What is the future like for growth? Are we looking 20, 30 years down the line before maybe possibly building another building, or, like you said, can be expanded? But do you have an idea of what Plan B, you know, how long the life of that size would be?
Well, I think that's really difficult to predict when more city services would be needed to build another building to be able to expand. So I won't try and do that, but that would be, to have the ability, position the building so expansion could make some sense here was the intention of that. And there's a pretty, you know, someone pointed out we got a lot of parking here, so there's actually a pretty generous width and length to go down to add a lot more building area. Two-story building could be added to that, you know, on that east side as well. So, you know, I don't know when, but that's the intention here. Whereas this building is, this option probably requires something, something to happen sooner than later. Yes, sir.
I think it's very important to have a decent-sized council chamber, because what's been pointed out in the past just now is very important, because I don't know what width you've got for that council chamber there. Of course, it doesn't look very wide, but if you could widen it and still have it long, because I think it's critical for the council to face the electorate. It really is, because it's very difficult to see people, and we've been crunched up together for years. 3 or 4 feet wouldn't hurt us at all, even if you've got to go left and right to get a couple of feet either side. Because all we're doing, the way it appears, of course I don't know the size, it appears that we're just replicating what we've already got in the fancier surroundings, you know.
Fair enough, and you know, certainly can look at this from different, you know, different table and seating arrangements and how that works and kind of help size out.
Yeah, because obviously you're coming in from the bottom portion there into the chamber, so you really are going to be facing from top to bottom, as it were, on there. And the other question I have, if you don't mind, how far down in the parking lot does this Plan B extend?
Well, this is the existing roof into the carport.
Oh, really?
Well, you probably can't see it from where you're at, but here, And here is graphically showing those 3 columns that are out there now. So we're building under the roof.
Better perspective, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Talk about money for a second. Plan A is right under 400,000.
Right.
So you mentioned something about the Ford grant? Can we
Correct.
go- Okay, so that would take how much off of that 400,000 approximately?
About 190,000 if we get everything we're asking for.
Okay, cool. Now, the old city hall, what is that worth? Did you say like 500,000?
Hang on, well, just 1 second, I'll look that up for you. So gross, that's 27,000 square feet at $6 per square foot, $164,118.
164,000.
Yes.
And then that money could be put on,
What's your net
oh,
though?
that's just.
What's your net?
That's just the land, buildings on 0.
Okay,
So it's only the
okay, just the land. Okay, but that then brings that total down to under 100,000 for
So,
Plan A, correct?
correct, if you were to factor in all of the property sales, that is total net 522,000.
I'm not talking about, just talking about the city hall one right now.
Okay.
I got you. Yeah, just my personal opinion, that I think option A is too small, and I think option B is too much for what it is. And I kind of think, and again, you guys did a great job at this. What Bill said may be an option. Then you guys can go and sell the other properties, and that would offset the standalone building for City Hall. Just a thought.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm opposed to either of these right now, even though I know you're gonna choose one, because it gives the city no incentive to build a new city hall. And if we're looking, a couple meetings ago, somebody said, we have to make really certain on our decisions today, because it's gonna affect us 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And what I see, if we keep this going, I see people waiting out the door to do city hall business, and I see it overcrowded full of kids in the library that's too small because we want to take this up. I thoroughly agree with Bill George on a double wide. They make them nice, this and that. And I don't know why you haven't even, I guess it's been considered, but you need to consider it more. Thank you.
Let's get somebody who hasn't had their hand up yet.
I'm appreciative of everything that's been going on already with the thought process. I know it's been a long effort. I'm concerned about the cost for the community. I'm not sure who to address this to, but just a few years ago, we had the bond for the school, and that was kind of a big deal. And it's a beautiful construction for the gym and the school, and that's great, but that's a hit to the community on the finances. And now this. So this is another potentially large financial implication for everyone in the city. So that's one part of it. The other part is, I don't know, I'm not convinced about the utilization of the space in terms of how the people here in Lowell use the space, how we used to use the other space, how many people are using the space and for what. And I know we had a library consultant, but you know, each small town is kind of different, and when you're considering it's our pocketbooks, we want to make sure we kind of get it right. And while both plans would most likely work, I wonder about in the first option, if there was more, in order to keep costs down for the community, if there was more utilization of how we configure the walls and more flexible workspaces, where there's accordion walls, so if you want a giant meeting room for the chamber, for the city council, then literally that could be, if there were bookcases that moved and then the accordion wall came out, and you've got half the space for the public and the city hall, instead of building solid walls to make each space, and same thing with the children's section, to enable, you know, again, some sort of flexibility of space so they can take over half of the space on the few times they need. If city council meetings are to the public once a month, we're talking about creating a space that you utilize not very often. And the way we work now with remote work, you've all been on Zoom and GoTo and Teams, and we have a lot of different ways of working. And so within the city hall space, you know, could some of those be duplicated? And I don't know all the functions of the city hall and the people and how they move throughout the space, but, you know, that might be one thing to also consider is how we use that space and how many people are really talking about working at the city hall and how many need a space. At my work, we share offices all the time. So is that a possibility? Maybe not, maybe. The other thing is books versus computers. I know, and again, I don't know the use of the old library in terms of how many people were coming to the library for the high-speed internet access, how many were coming for the books or the children's programs. And so I think that needs to be balanced, but again, that could be a flexibility of space issue where, okay, we need 10 stations for the internet because people don't have it at home. 10 laptops, boom, bang, you know, set that up, check those out, however that might work. You can go on a table, depending on if it's wireless. I don't know. So the way we work has changed since 3 years ago, I think, when we started down this path, or maybe we've been at it longer, I don't know.
Well, I'll address a couple of the things that you commented on. In terms of City Hall, your account accommodating 3 people working, city administrator has an office, and the city clerk also has an office. Sam and Jeremy are in those roles now. In addition to that, there's a part-time accountant comes in the office a few times a week, and so there's a desk for that person, and that's what we're planning on in the space. There's not a lot more space. I mean, there's basically the public counter, and there's a lot of interaction that happens throughout the day, throughout the week. And then as much storage as possible. We'll have a little space for each little break area, but mostly that space is, in addition to those office spaces, is storage. You know, a lot of storage needs, and this storage room, as its position, is really intending to serve both the supporting the meeting room. Table and chair storage is always an issue, plus whatever available space is in that. So that's the intention there. We have talked about, and that could apply to any of the library options, the stacks being mobile, and so it can be done to build those with casters or rollers on the bottom. Those are more expensive. I've done a lot of school libraries that way where everything can be moved around. They don't get moved very often. There's always a challenge of how much more do you spend to make something flexible when you know it's probably not going to be flexible, but that could happen. And so it could be that, you know, in any of these scenarios, if a very large council meeting needed to happen, you know, things could get moved out to be able to do that. We don't have that many walls here. I mean, you know, the city administrator has meetings in the office, so I think having permanent walls there makes sense. Storage rooms, restrooms, that kind of stuff makes some sense. And I don't recall if there's anything else that of the questions and comments I can answer here. I think the one thing, you know, the way that in the conversations I've had with Penny and with the group, the library hasn't operated for a few years. And it really didn't, you know, it's, what we're planning on is a community library. That's what a lot of communities of this size have. It isn't necessarily what was here before. In some ways, there hasn't been a library for a while. So it's not as, so the approach that we've taken is not necessarily to target to what was, you know, how many people were in it before and activities that happened before, but it's of a community of this size for a new library, what makes sense? And that's, you know, that's where some of this planning numbers come from, and access to computer workstations. We are planning on relatively basic workstations or sitting areas along the perimeter on both sides. And they could have workstations there or not. They could all have an Ethernet cable, or they could all have Wi-Fi, whether it's portable or something that's fixed in place is certainly an option, but trying to do that relatively economically along the perimeters. Yes, sir.
So, one observation I wanted to make about a separate city hall building. I see that as a possibility in the future as Lowell continues to grow, which it is and it will. But for now, I see real benefit in the co-location around things like the bathrooms and the meeting space, because those are expensive elements of a building. The meeting space that's only occupied part-time turns it into kind of an expensive little piece of real estate. And whenever you can share that, that's a good thing, and here you've got it shared. If we were to have a separate city hall, which someday we probably will need, it's gonna have its own meeting space and its own bathrooms. You'll also want event space and bathrooms over here, and that's just, for me, in the short term, that's an unnecessary duplication of cost. But in terms of cost, I also wanted to know, you talked about how much would be added to the utility bills, but for how long? Is it the same term, or is one of those longer than the other? And maybe Jeremy can answer that.
The question of the monthly fee.
For option A, the biggest driver for that is how quickly and for how much we could sell those vacant properties. For option B, that could potentially be the difference between a 40-year loan and a 20-year loan. So if we get everything that we're projecting for the property sales plus the grants, the term of the loan would be for 20 years, and that's how long we would need to recoup some costs through the utility bills.
Okay. But for option A, you anticipate it would be less than that?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm going to just comment on the co-location comment that we made. That was a big part of the conversation here, of trying to maximize this building to be able to serve both. We also talked a lot about how the library operated, which is a little different than what I just said, but the library is primarily a volunteer-operated library. But the city staff supported that operation in a very important way. And so if volunteers weren't available or couldn't be there, at least someone could unlock the building because it's in the same building. And that's a primary strategy here, is that can still happen, that the city staff can support the operation of the library, to help offset the availability of volunteers. Someday there could be a librarian, but that's really unrelated to the spaces. There's still going to need to be, we have some staff work areas in these places, whether it's volunteers or someone who gets paid, we still have that space. I
know you touched on this before, yeah, I'm not familiar with City Hall. How many full-time employees are in City Hall?
Two.
Just two, right? Okay. And then there's other people that come in throughout the day and have a workspace there, is that correct?
One other person who's coming in, then Max, Public Works has
Okay.
additional staff that works in different places, but they're in there as well.
Okay, all right, gotcha. Is there any way possible turning on the lights in those rooms to see how deep it is?
Sure.
Well, if you look at one, that's where City Hall would be, is in this room.
Right, correct.
That, on that drawing, is that off?
So that again?
Yes.
So the one thing I noticed is, with regards to City Hall and City Hall only, A and B, if they are to scale, they're essentially the same size. So in B, it might be better to give City Hall a little more space. take away a little from the library, which I hate to do, but the library in A is quite a bit smaller, but it's also quite a bit bigger in B, but the city hall is the same.
I think the multi-purpose room adds to some of that space. in the office.
So the yellow part in the center in B,
Yeah.
This,
I see,
this,
okay.
that is, should have been yellow really in that comment. That conference room really is the equivalent to that. And there's, there's a little bit of a difference, but that's the
Well,
main
so
difference.
then in A, you could take a little bit, not much, but a little bit from the library and make that conference room a little better, and then it would satisfy a lot of issues that was brought up today.
In A, I think to take this out and make it equivalent to that is something that really starts to sacrifice the library.
Maybe not equivalent, but a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
A little bit.
it's trying to, again, this is, and I'll.
Too bad there isn't an option A and a half. Because A is not quite big enough, and B might
Right.
be too big.
There are some of the other options we looked at, is some different ways of doing that, and that's how these two kind of came out of that process, was to make the most sense. So, I'm gonna,
Oh, yeah, back to the storage, and it could just be like perception on this mock-up drawing. But, the storage part in option B looks like it could be 2 more offices in there. So I'm curious, what kinds of things would be stored there? Because if we're talking paper type things, technology can take care of some of that space.
Sam, you wanna,
Sam should probably
No.
answer this.
actually, yes.
We have, documents that that we are required to keep and we cannot.
Forever, or just a certain period of time?
Forever, so we have all the plans for every building in the city. Not just the house plans, but the schools and all the public buildings and the water plant, sewer plant, all that, the infrastructure, everything is kept in there, and those are things that have to be maintained. There is stuff that we've started, following the guide, encouraging, because it was not, it's not realistic to keep, things for 100 years. But there is significant amounts of legally required documents that we do have to keep, and that takes an untold amount of space. And that doesn't count the server room or all that specific stuff. We are looking into the ability to store more things electronically. But that's gonna be a process, and we're starting, we've already started the process of reviewing that. It is a lot, there is a lot of storage. It takes a lot of stuff to run a city. I mean, yeah, a lot.
I think the city's gonna have a real challenge of dealing with what's in that space now, which is a lot bigger than that storage room. So we're gonna fill that space up, and we'll have to utilize some available space, whether Maximum is or not, or some of the water plant or whatnot, to accommodate some of that stuff. But there's a lot of things out there that there's some things that can be thrown away. There's a lot that can be scanned, but there's a lot of physical stuff that needs the space. And as you pointed out, we're probably expecting the fire alarm panel to be located in that room, maybe the server rack to be located in that room. So that room is doing a ton, as it is now.
Sure, it's just kind of, storage, it's like, okay, is it an oversized closet, right? So that's just the point of my question, to clarify.
Well, of course, there's always folding chairs and folding tables that you have available in City Hall that you need to bring out for different activities, and it's got to be stored somewhere, not the other side of town.
Yes.
What are their proposed hours? Will the library run at the same hours as the city hall? Or what is the intention there?
From a space planning perspective, the intention is to be able to, and this really applies in either option, is to have both the library and the city hall function independently of each other. So there could be evening and afternoon uses with minimal staffing
in the building. Because we have a locked lobby, you could, have a program where trusted volunteers are given the key. If you don't have that, then you gotta have somebody on site to be able to manage that. So that's how we've approached that, and that applies in both options. And the restrooms are accessible off of that common area. I have a couple of questions. First for Jeremy. On the parcels that you have for sale, do those don't appear to include this lot right over here on $375,000 lot right over here?
The East Main Street, that's correct. The East Main Street property isn't included because the city currently has a loan that we use to finance the acquisition of that, so
So you have to pay the loan.
we have to pay the loan off.
Okay. And then, on the library, Kurt, did your consultant do a narrative to explain how she arrived at this recommendation? And if yes, could you get that to Jeremy so we could share that with the rest of us? And Jeremy, would you like me to send you an email to remind you to
Sure,
send me
absolutely.
a copy of that?
And I can post it on the website, so it's
Yeah, if you
publicly
post it
available.
on the website, that would be great. And then, I have trouble, you mentioned earlier that one of the ideas was that the city staff would augment the library volunteers similar to what they used to do in the current city hall. And then you just talked about them operating independently. Those two ideas seem a little bit in conflict, but looking at either of these plans, I don't see how it's possible for city staff to be monitoring what's going on in the library. As soon as you have one person in there, in this big space, city staff's going to have to be there with them, and that just
They could
doesn't
still
work.
be there to let people in, they could stay there, they could take a portable in there, there's some things that they can do.
Yeah, they can do all kinds of things in there. And if their clientele, like the Eugene Public Library has, then you need staff in there
Yeah.
with them 100% of the time.
Well, again, when you're relying on volunteers,
I know, I just,
sometimes you're committed to being open, and volunteers can't make it, so there's gotta be some ways.
I just
So
don't see how they can do it.
having people in a co-located facility makes that a little bit more convenient. That was the point that was made with co-location.
And something else that we mentioned at the last meeting is option B and option A. The option B with the 1.8554 million. Some of that is a la carte. We could choose to defray some of those costs. We could choose to not do the parking lot upgrade right now. We can choose not to do siding upgrade. We can make some modifications to that to where we actually don't necessarily go all the way to the 1.8554 million. There's some real easy takeaways from the project that I think we kind of worked into it so we can say, well, we're not going to do that right now and make that cost a little less than $12 a month on the thing and the 1.8 total cost for the project. So that's the whole deal for option B, but it doesn't mean that there's not some a la carte items that are going to be taken away.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's also a strategy in bidding of bidding alternates, what's referred to as bid alternates. So you could, for instance, we could do, the base bid could be the improvements to the building as reflected here. And we could have a bid option to also replace, improve the parking lot. Well, maybe those prices come in a number that we think is really good, and we'll take that bid, or we're not pleased with it, we'll just pass on that for now. So there's a lot of strategies for how budgets are used. Again, it's a budget that's intended to give the city options moving forward. Yes.
So I'm new to the area, and my focus, I'm not gonna lie, is the library, not the kids, really, in our community. I see them running around, so they need a safe spot to be here. And my question is, I know that Hayden Homes is good houses. How many houses are that's expected to bring in? 26. And what's our expected growth in the next couple of years? It must be, everybody wants to be moving here. So my thing is, I look at this space right now with the kids in the community, and this is not really big enough. So, that's my concern.
Well, I think the kids have an option to also use the school facility for the adults in the community.
Yeah.
So they're the shared space, in a very, close proximity to this, to defray some of that usages between the gyms and the library and the electronics rooms at the school to share that out a little bit.
Yeah, one adults too, right? Be able to use the computer.
Yeah, if we can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Question for Jeremy, how many utilities are funding this? How many do you nail out?
We have 490 customers, is that correct, Sim?
Close enough, right? And of course, one of the issues we have, of course, that is being funded from those 490, but we have a lot of other rural communities that come and use this facility. So, you say, well, wait a minute, if you don't, in the city, you can't use the library. Well, that's not the right thing to do. So we have a lot of people who use the library facility. So, do we then, and of course this is down the road, then do we start to make that you would pay a fee, a library fee? We've never done that. But there again, the library has been so important in the past, and more than what you realise of the activity that's gone on with the children in this community. It's incredible, and of course a lot of you don't see it because you're not around there, but if you spend a lot of time in city facilities and volunteering, you see it, and of course in the past we had a great volunteer group, and of course because of what's happened, and we've not been able to do that. But it was a really first-class operation, it really was. And it's so important that children socialise with people. You can only go so far on a computer. And it has a sociological effect to bring people together in a library with children. It really does. And we would not want to get away from that. And it's a service. We can't always count numbers, but it's a service. And you see the results by the reaction of those children when they're in the library and when they come out as well. So we need to take that into account also. It's not all dollars and cents.
I'd like to mention something about what Bill said earlier about the double wide or triple wide. I think we're all aware, if we've ever been in maintenance in our lives, that the maintenance capabilities to be able to perform maintenance on those pre-built structures is not the same as a stick-built structure. The longevity is not the same. The quality of materials is not the same. The ease of repairs and installation is not the same. There is a drastic difference between any pre-manufactured housing unit and a stick-built manufactured unit. And I think that's to where it might seem like a good idea for the first 5 or 10 years, but I think 15 to 20 years down the road, we're going to be throwing away that $180,000. It's going to be going to the dump, or we're going to pay somebody to haul it away, and we're going to be looking at doing that cost all over again. So that's, in my opinion, I understand the financial reasonability of going down that path, but in my opinion, it's not a permanent solution for the community for a long-term solution.
Also depreciate our value too. It's a depreciation of our value for our houses too.
And it doesn't fit the downtown master plan.
Another example, Tim, is if you go in Eugene at the east or west of PC at Willamette 29, at the former Willard School site, 4J built a modular campus that was intended to be a transitional, a temporary location for the 2 new elementary schools that are in construction. I was involved in that project when it started. It was anticipated to be an economical solution for a short-term way to add classes or add class space. By the time it got finished, just dealing with all the code requirements, the structural requirements to tie those buildings to the ground, accessibility requirements, everything else, it would have not that much different than a permanent building, but it's not a permanent building.
Yeah, and I'm in no way trying to say that somebody who has a pre-manufactured house, doesn't have a quality home, and can't do good upkeep on it, and end up with a long-term quality product. But that usually requires a lot of extra input and maintenance and costs over the years to keep it up to that quality.
Well, we are getting pretty late into the evening here, and what I would suggest is we'll turn it back over to the mayor, who will close the meeting, and then if anybody has more questions or comments, most of us on the design committee will stick around and answer your questions until we're all done. So with that, Mayor?
Thank you, Kurt. That was a lot of information. Okay, I hope everybody feels sufficiently informed about what we're trying to do. And if you had any questions, I hope those were answered. So what's next? This issue is already on the agenda for next Tuesday. The council will have Mr. Cottle review the options. We'll receive the results from the pink slips and what was submitted tonight. Any other notes that was been passed on through the internet to Mr. Cottle. Consider the questions and responses that we heard tonight. Hear a motion, have a discussion that includes the thoughts of the entire city council, and possibly render a decision. Okay.
So I'd like to say, you know, that much like any community event, you know, we had a community event last week to decide on, you know, to make some decisions on the property. Almost like any committee we see around the community, we're seeing, you know, 2 to 5% of the community at these events. Feel free to go home and motivate other people to send in their surveys or to reach out to Jeremy and give their input. We would really like to have, you know, the general consensus of this community making decisions like this and not be basing our decisions off of a small sampling size. So engage your neighbors. I know that a lot of people in the Fall Creek area were feeling, you know, disenfranchised over this meeting tonight, like, well, I didn't get a pink survey. They can still give input to this decision if they reach out to Jeremy. I think it's pretty well our intent that this is a community library, not just for the city of Lowell, whatever we have to do to go down the road, figure out how to get them engaged in the funding of this. But I don't think it's our intent to ever be exclusionary for the larger community of Fall Creek, Dexter, Little Fall Creek, Winbury, etc. I think try to get those people engaged in the process so they don't feel disenfranchised, and we want a large sample size for our decision.
And along those same lines, I just want to point out there's vacancies on the library committee.
Yes, sir. Bunch of committees.
And a bunch of committees, yeah.
So fill out the slip and put them all.
Can an issue this large go on the ballot? Because, you know, so few people, proportionately, you won't get 400 results. You know, it seems to me that, you know, you get the surveys in, and from those, you're making a large decision for over $1 million for the community. Could it not go on a ballot? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems very unfair that a decision for everybody to pay all this extra money over 40 years is concluded from just a small group of people. For want of a better word, how you said that, some demographic, you know. But I'm just wondering, it seems a large amount of money to be decided on with a small group.
I'll agree with you there. This building's
I don't know what you can do.
The library's been closed for 2 years. The election is next November. Unless we call for a special election, we have to pay for that. And then a year after that decision is made that we're gonna do it, then we come back again, or else it's on the ballot for an A or a B. So, you know, you're talking about a library that's gonna be closed 3 years, 4 years, by the time you get construction done. You know, then you kind of wonder, do we really, we need a city hall, do we really need a library? By
You
stretching
see,
it
you
out
got to
the
strike while the iron's hot as well, too, you know, that's another issue, you know.
So hopefully we'll make the right decision.
It's a bit tricky.
John, if I could also just comment on the issue of timing. Normally, when we're doing planning projects, they are something that's gonna get voted on, so there's a cost escalation for years out. This project, the assumption is that a decision's gonna get made and the project moves forward, and we're bidding winter, spring construction, so we're not really factoring in escalation over those time frames. Construction escalation used to be 3% a year. You could count on it through the last century. That's not happening anymore.
Forget it now.
So it'll never be less expensive to build option one or A or B than it is today.
Right, exactly.
That's-
Okay,
So just one more question.
Sure.
When do we expect to break ground on either A or B? When is
if we make the
projected
decision on Tuesday,
I think this is a spring, construction activity. I think there's, you know, that's pretty manageable. Some permitting, if anybody's been trying to get a permit now, that's the biggest wild card here. Most of the work is, you know, it's undercover. And so.
Well, they saw was there, the permit guy.
Well, it's more than that.
We know a guy.
So, most of the work is, you know, it's undercover, right? And so, getting a late spring start, and, you know, it's still pretty wet, shouldn't be that much of a factor here. So we're kind of ignoring the weather. Yes, sir.
Going back over to Lisa with, if everyone says Plan A, just hypothetically speaking, and just looking at how it's laid out, it's a big area for a library. Right now, there's no one using the one row of library books over there. With the expansion, with the accordion doors, can we maybe, again, like we said, increase the size of City Hall, and then library, shrink it down a little bit, because all this up in here is going to be library also, correct? Like a kids area, isn't it a library mostly all kids anyway?
The question of where the divider is, the question of where there's certainly flexibility in where that
Right.
divider is, in terms of separating the space. And that's something that can continue to get evaluated.
Well, I say, if it's voted on next week, is that plan in concrete, this, how it's laid out?
No, I would say the distinction between the two options is option A utilizes the perimeter building as it is now.
Okay.
Option B expands under the roof. Where walls are, you know, of course, the new difference between an existing wall and a new wall, that's certainly something that can get worked out. And it is adjustable. So,
anyone else?
I just want to say thanks, everybody who's put work into this and put this on tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everybody coming out.
Okay, thank you for coming out, have a nice evening.
Hey, Mike, where are these chairs from?
Just leave them. I gotta wipe them all down.
Hey, young lady. What's up? Well, what's that?
You don't need
I'd have to say, well,
it. Can be, you know,
actually the night back to.
there will be some around here.
I think good. I drive by and see this car and drive by. She's still there. She's there. I smile like a and I kayak about it yesterday. She outside watching
My dog's outside, but I'm not out.
We have two of them. I see you outside looking at the point of distance, but I thought, you know, if I whistle at you, probably you'd be the thing.
No, I wouldn't do that. It's a party day.
I don't know who you are, but take
Oh,
care.
no, I wait. Thanks for showing up. Pardon me?
Well, I don't quite know if they're gonna want me back there. You know, I mean, I don't wanna do something and then say, oh, sorry, I'm gonna go up, and they're gonna make me go back to six. So I mean, I'm hoping. But no, what I just told you. I just. No, I mean like. I'm up there a lot more than they do. What's up there?
Are you still trying to affect me?
Oh, no, I'm not, but they're talking about, there's any of the supervisors, and my supervisor, she kind of wants us all working together, so, I'm also. I thought you were handing it out. I'm not looking around, I'd rather stay down here, there are other positions where I don't have to go up, so I'm.
I consider that.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, I'm looking for a single, but this is
You know, the one thing, and I'm, the one thing is, Eugene has suffered from, you don't have strong central. And you have to